think we're about to start.
All right, I'll be quiet.
No,
No.
that wasn't the idea. I'm going to mute everybody. And then if you have a question, you can electronically raise your hand. If you go to participants and it says raise hand, and you can do that electronically, and then we can see that you have a question. Although there's two parts to this. And then we'll show a video of the real defendants in the case with Lee's commentary. And Lee can interrupt anytime, and I have a lot of questions for him, and you may too. My impression was I learned so much from hearing it the second and third times. I was amazed, and a lot of the questions I had been ready to ask Lee were answered in the play. And so it's very helpful if you really pay attention, because the play is very well written, not necessarily by these men, but by Lee, and answers a lot of questions about the trial and what happens afterwards and their emotional state. So I would encourage you, even if you've seen it once, to
and our time, and the actors have donated their skills so that we could make a recording of this play for you to see.
Where did you find these actors? And
I don't, excuse me, that's all done by North Coast. And I, although this was the second time they did it, the first time they did it, the actors only meet that afternoon and rehearse for the one time and then come out and do it. And I was just blown away by how incredible they were. And again, this the acting is just marvelous. I've seen it about 10 times, and I'm embarrassed to say that I'm still moved by it, even though I wrote it. I know that's terribly immodest of me, but the truth is just so overwhelming that I'm moved each time I see it.
you should be. I think it's an amazing portrayal of who they are and what happened to them and how they feel about it. And I learn a little bit each time I see that. Anybody else want to unmute themselves and comment? We're going to see the real people in a minute if I can get my screen right. But anybody have any comments about it? I do want to ask you, Lee, at the end when they ask for a plea to do something,
Yes.
what is it they want us to do? And is that still valid?
No, it was it was a clemency petition, which basically was to have them have their sentences reduced and get out of prison. Of course, it's moot now because they're all out. They all served their term, with few exceptions. At the very end, there's a new law called the First Step Law that permits people to be released a little bit earlier. But most of them had served their entire sentences. Just unbelievable sentences. I still haven't gotten over how long those sentences are.
It is amazing. Let me get, after I saw the play, I was so surprised to find out they weren't the real people.
Yes, I began to believe that too.
And I'm trying to find the real people here on my screen. No. Oh, this is a little bit Lee, that he spent 11 years on the federal bench, which you may or may not know. Okay, these are the real defendants. And let's hear a little bit from them.
Who's who? Okay, we'll just go down the line. Great. Okay, we'll go ahead and start. I'm David Banks.
Demetrius Harper, Clint Stewart, David Zerbolo,
Kendrick Barnes.
We never heard from the white guy, right? In the play, we never heard from him.
No.
Was it because of what the guy said about his family being upset that he was involved?
Yes, and they say later in this interview that even the judge apparently had said to him, "You probably we wouldn't be here if you hadn't tied up with these five black guys." I mean, that was unbelievable to me. But somewhere in this interview, he disclosed that. By the way, for your other listeners, the man up in the right is a Mark. Um,
Christopher
Mark
Lawrence.
Christopher, who was one of the actors. You might recognize him, but he's got an incredibly big beard now.
And the woman, I think, is the family of, how do I do this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the woman in the back is a woman named Olivia Hodges. I'm not sure, but she has been my liaison with them since day one. She's the one who brought me into it.
Oh, she is. How did that happen?
Uh, she called me one day and asked, and was just out of the blue, excuse me, if I would do a radio broadcast.
And I'm Mark Christopher Lawrence.
You were saying, Lee?
If I would do a radio interview on some strange issue about a missing transcript. And didn't tell me much more, but wanted to know what my experience had been and had it ever happened. And why I said yes, I don't know, but I was in a good mood. And I said, sure, I'll go on the radio program. And then during the course of the program, they began to tell me about this case. And I was sort of fascinated by the legal issue. And then I looked into the case, began reading the transcripts and everything, and got very involved. Wrote a series of articles for the Huffington Post, 5 or 6, slowly building up my anger about what had happened to them. And then when that was done, I finally decided to write this play.
I wonder if her
play would provide an avenue for people to sign a petition for clemency and then submit it to President Obama. I think we got about 3,000 people to sign, but the clemency petition was not granted.
I wonder if she contacted you because of your work on the Hurricane Carter case.
Yes, that's exactly why. That case has prompted a lot of inquiries like that, but that was definitely the connection. They thought if I got involved, it might help them in some way.
So in the Hurricane Carter case, you actually presided over the case as an appellate judge.
No, I was a district court judge at the time.
District court judge.
Yes. And actually, I was on the court of 17 years total.
And then Hurricane Carter was a black boxer who was convicted of a triple murder.
Correct.
And you did what?
Well, it's a little complicated, but when you are convicted in the state court proceeding and you go through all of the courts up to the state Supreme Court, you are then entitled to go into the federal district court and apply for what's called habeas corpus. And basically all that is it gives the federal district court the right to review the proceedings to see if there are any federal constitutional violations. I found that there were. I granted the writ. The state appealed it all the way to the United States Supreme Court. Fortunately for everybody, maybe me as well as Carter, we were affirmed and he's a free man. Unfortunately, just died very recently.
And you said that he didn't receive a fair trial because
Yes.
prosecution had been based on racism.
Yes, the prosecutor had made a very racially charged summation to the jury, basically saying, uh, I have to just go back a minute. He was convicted once and it went on appeal. And the New Jersey Supreme Court basically asked, what would be the motivation? Why would the best known man in Paterson, New Jersey, the most easily identified person, walk into a bar and shoot 4 people he never met before? And in the second trial, they sort of suggested that it was racially motivated. And the prosecutor had said something to the effect, that's what black people do. And that was more than I could take, and I ruled on that. There was another very complicated issue that I won't go into because it goes on too long about lie detector tests. But basically, that was the reason for my granting it. And fortunately, it went up, was affirmed by the Court of Appeals. They took it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court refused to hear it, and he was freed. Very, very emotional, dramatic moment for me.
Right. If you had presided over this case, it might have had a completely different outcome.
Oh yes, this case I'll never get over. I just to this day I don't understand it.
Oh, excuse me, are we going to find out what happened to these gentlemen after they were released and what their lives are like now?
Thanks,
Yes,
Arlene. I was going to ask that question.
Yeah, definitely. Their lives are terrible as a result of the convictions. They are convicted felons, and I've spoken to them. By the way, for the first time ever, this is the second meeting that you will see on the screen, but I had spoken to them once before in a Zoom meeting, and they just said that they cannot get jobs because they're convicted felons. As you can see, they're all very experienced, very educated, just the loveliest people. But their lives have just been ruined by this, and it's very sad.
And I had a question too. I put up my hand, but I guess Faye didn't see it.
No, I don't have that yet.
I see. So where were they tried and who was the judge? I mean, in light of everything we know, I think her name, I think it was a woman, must be spoken.
Yes, yeah, if I remember how to, it's Arguello, Judge Arguello, and it was in Denver.
I want to play a little bit more of this recording that you did with the 5 defendants. Are there 6 or 5, or how many are there anyway?
There are 6 total. There's been some internal disagreement with one of them, and so he's not here for this meeting, and I don't know what the details are, but there's been some disagreement with him. Frankly, I don't even remember which one it is.
Yeah.
But,
And you didn't include the white guy in your play.
right, in the first time, yes. But he's there, and a really very interesting comments.
Yeah, let me.
I don't know if you're going to play or not, Faye, but
Right.
he talks about how he was treated so differently.
I'm going to play that right now.
Okay, then I won't spoil
It's very interesting. Yeah.
Who's who? Okay, we'll just go down the line. Great. Okay, we'll go ahead and start. I'm David Banks.
Sorry. I have to.
Demetrius
No,
Harper,
we did it already.
Clint Stewart, David Zerpolo,
Kendrick Barnes.
And I'm Mark Christopher Lawrence.
First, we'd like to thank Judge Sarokin and also you, Mr. Lawrence, for donating your time. It was that was a very powerful
Sorry.
reading, and like I said, our appreciation we can't really put into words how much we appreciate you guys donating your time and things like that toward our cause. It was very valuable and very important to us.
So Um, I wanted to show the comments of the white guy, but Lee was about to say what they were, how differently he was treated.
You want me to?
Yeah, you might as well, because I seem to have lost that
Yeah.
transcript.
David Zaprolo, during this Zoom conference, said for the first time I heard that when the FBI raided the place, he was treated differently than the 5 African Americans. He was told that he could go home, he could take whatever he wanted with him, and they treated him very politely. The others were treated terribly. They were observed, they couldn't leave, they couldn't take anything. The difference in the treatment was just shocking to me. And I said to him when he told me, I wish I had known, because I would have included all of that in the play. But it was just a distinct difference in how the FBI agents treated him as opposed to the African Americans.
But he still served a long sentence, 7 to 10.
Yeah, he got the lighter sentence.
He did.
My recollection, he was on the bottom, maybe the 7 years. And he said, which totally shocked me, that the judge said the same thing to him, that he probably wouldn't be involved here if he hadn't gone into business with these 5 black guys, which to have a judge say that in a court of law is just mind-boggling to me.
Are you still involved in this case, Lee? Is there any hope for these guys to get any kind of compensation or reversal or anything?
They won't ever get compensation because they've been found guilty. The only thing that they're hoping for now is a pardon. It has to come from the president. And
That's not going to happen.
Not very likely here, but you never know. I mean, it may be that Trump might see this as an opportunity to gain some African American votes by freeing them. But there are 17,000 pardon applications pending right now. So that they would be singled out. It just takes somebody like Kardashian to speak to the president, because that's the way the last, I forget who got out as a result of her intervention, which shows you how high-minded the pardon process is right now.
Carolyn,
I have a question. Whatever happened to the items that the raid confiscated? Were they ever returned to them?
No, they never got it back. And what was so sad about that is that that was their work. There was no way for them to resume what they were doing because everything had been taken from them. And of course they applied to get it back, but the government took the position it was evidence and they kept it so long. But I don't think they've gotten it back as of today.
I have a question.
Yes.
go ahead, Carolyn.
Yes, I wanted to know, since they're waiting for a pardon, does that mean that felony would be taken away from their sentence so they would be permitted to get jobs if they were not categorized as felonies? Does that happen when you get a pardon?
No, you still have to disclose, as I understand it, that you've been convicted of a felony, but then you can say you've been pardoned for it. But it does not eliminate as a matter of record the felony conviction.
Their invention sounded so good and so helpful to the country. And is that what you're saying was taken away and they can never use it? Or can somebody else abscond with it? Or how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, nobody else can take it. The theory of this, who was after them, it has never really been disclosed. They have a suspicion that rather being done by one of the staffing companies that they owed money to. They think it might have been pushed by somebody, and I don't want to be sued for libel, but they think that it might have been prompted and pushed by somebody like IBM, which eventually came out with a very similar system. That's a suspicion because it's very hard to explain why somebody was so aggressive with this. I mean, the idea of the FBI saying there's no case here in writing and going to a grand jury and the grand jury saying there's no case and still pursuing it, somebody was very anxious to close this company down.
That's very interesting in light of the Breonna Taylor experience with the grand jury, where they did not convict anybody who shot her.
Yes.
And here, this grand jury said there's no case.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the idea that the prosecutor can convict a ham sandwich didn't even work out in this case.
No, you're talking about in
I mean, our case here, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a mystery, and they still don't know. But the fact is, they're living the consequences of it, no matter who it was, their lives. And I've had the experience, and this is an aside that I think is fairly important. I have received the loveliest letters while they were in prison from them, from their spouses, from their parents, just so appreciative of the effort. I mean, these letters just make you cry. They're just such incredibly lovely people, and such believers. They're all church members. And the one thing they have said to me throughout, no matter what, don't worry, God will provide. And they still believe that. And I just admire it. I don't necessarily accept it, but they're just remarkable people with remarkable families.
In that video that I started to show, they seem very bitter and talk about the Department of Injustice, and well, that's in your play. And yet they are willing to forgive and to be so accommodating to what happened to them, and
Yes.
not bitter. I mean, you'd think they would blow up the Justice Department or something.
No, they're remarkable. They say they don't hate anybody. If you know from watching that video,
Yeah.
They're people of faith, and they've had it throughout, and they're incredibly smart too, which is another thing about the case, is that, as they say, they were educated, they had incredible experience, they were working on a wonderful project. And what's infuriating to me about this case is the basic claim that was that they lied to the staffing companies, that they had deals where they claimed, they said they hoped they had them or they were close. I mean, that was it. But the prosecution came in and tried to convince the jury that the thing they were working on was a scam, that they were just doing it to get money. And the idea, and that's what got me crazy, because the money never went to them. When they hired the staffing companies paid the employees. No money ever went to these 6 people. And so what was the scam that they were running? They were providing money for other people, and the only reason they were hiring staffing companies was to improve their product and sell it. So my view, and the reason I think they were innocent, is they had no intent to defraud. Their intent was to complete the project, sell it, and pay everybody.
So what is the makeup of the jury?
Yes, I'm gonna
There
ask.
were two African Americans and 10 whites.
And I have a question too. What have been their fortunes? They must be pretty destitute if they cannot find work at the level of skills that they have.
Yes, now they're, the destitute is the word. The only thing I've observed is this church is remarkable. And I'm sure that's where they're getting their support and livelihood from.
I just wanted to ask, you know, no matter what happened, these were non-violent crimes. I mean, these were white collar, you know, just to label it as crimes because it's what they did, but of course they were innocent. But being non-violent, I mean, did that not give them some leeway to have less harsh sentences because they weren't a problem for the community or the public at large?
Oh, I totally agree. That there were so many things about this case that were over the top, and certainly those sentences of 7 to 11 years.
Severe.
Those are heavy. Those are heavy sentences. I mean, I always say people. I sentenced somebody once to 5 years, and a friend I was playing tennis with, and he said, "Oh, you only gave them 5 years." And I said, "You can't use the word only in front of 5 years. You have no idea what it is for a person that first night to go into a cell and hear that door close and know that they're going to be there for any length of time." And 7 to 11 years is a very, very long, severe sentence, far more than they deserved, even if they were guilty.
Right.
I mean, the worst that they did was they said to people, "We have deals and we don't really have them. Do this work for us." I mean, that doesn't get you 11 years in prison.
Did they misrepresent the deals they had to the people that they were supposed to be paying?
Well, that's what the claim was, that like they said, they had this deal with New York. Well, it wasn't a firm deal, but they had definitely gotten the impression that they had it. So they may have said that it was better than they really did. I mean, they denied it. They said, "We never said we had firm crack." They said the truth, what they thought, but some of the staffing companies said, "Oh no, you told us you had a deal." So that was a difference of testimony. But my point is, even if they lied, they said they had contracts and they didn't. They didn't do it with the intent to defraud. They intended to pay the companies. If you made the misrepresentation not intending to pay, that's a crime. But if you made it, but you really expected to pay, you haven't committed a crime. And that's the distinction that I make.
You called it race card up, face up.
Yes.
Where did the racial problems come into this case? Can you possibly delineate from the FBI to the prosecution to the judge to the jury? Where was the racial aspects of this case?
Well, it's hard, Faye, to point to anything. There were just little things that came up. The one about when the FBI came in, they said to them, "Would you hire a white woman?" That was one. The disparity between the way the white officer in the company was treated and the African Americans were treated. And then just the total aspect of it, the idea that they were treated as flight risks, as I put in the play, that this is shouldn't be laughable, but it is.
Sir.
They all lived in the same community. Their families were there. They all belonged to the church. They had no money. You don't keep people in prison pending appeal just because there was no real risk that they were going anywhere. And I thought that was also a sign that because they were Black, that happened. It wouldn't have happened if they were white. That's my view.
Don't you think that the judge has a very big role in how, you know, she guides this whole thing? If she's someone that has a prejudice, can really make a difference. I mean, one way or the other, really. The fact that the sentence was so strong, the fact that they would not show that tape that was supposedly missing or they couldn't find. I mean, that sort of thing looks as though they were hiding something, and doesn't the judge have a lot to say about that sort of thing that goes on? You don't think that that makes a difference, do you?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I'm always hesitant to suggest that the judge was biased or bigoted. I think she was very upset that they had fired their lawyers. They all had public defenders, and they fired them all because the public defenders wanted them to plead guilty, which I have to say happens in 95% of the cases. They're very busy. They don't want to be involved in a long, complicated case like this. They say, you know, make a plea, you'll get 2 or 3 years, and it'll all be over. And these were very principled people, and they didn't want to plead guilty when they felt that they were innocent.
And they were smart, so they didn't want to stick with a situation which would be a loser.
Right. And I think the judge was annoyed. I mean, it's very hard. I can only tell you, when you try a case where the defendants are representing themselves, what we call pro se, you have to be careful. You don't want to guide them. You don't want to be their lawyer, but you don't want them to make mistakes that can create reversible error. And it's very hard for a judge to try a case, particularly with 6 defendants, all representing themselves.
That they were defending themselves.
Yes.
In other words, they didn't hire anybody else.
No.
They defended themselves.
Which was a terrible case. The choice. I have said, not to them, that a first-year law student could have won this case. They should have had a lawyer, but that's the kind of people they were. They didn't think that any jury would convict them, even if they proceeded without a lawyer. And I think that was a terrible mistake. But they did it and paid the consequence.
They did have a lawyer for the appeal, didn't they?
Yes, they had. I'm also reluctant to say that too. They had some, and I gave her some credit in the play. Some young lawyer represented them, and I looked at the brief on appeal and was not at all happy with it. And I also saw the petition to the Supreme Court, and it just was not quality work. And I think this case could have been won at trial, and I certainly think it could have been won on appeal if they had had good lawyering.
They mentioned in the play that their company had 2 law firms of some repute.
Yeah, but they were not on the appeal. I thought that was not clear when I saw it. Those were lawyers that they hired for the business.
Right.
They had a patent lawyer and they had a regular lawyer to help them with their business, but were not firms that represented them in court. And that was a mistake I made. I should have made that clearer.
And they committed not a criminal offense. How did they get convicted in a criminal court?
Well, fraud. I mean, basically, it's what you call wire fraud. You know, anything that goes through the phone or through mail, and they're claiming that, at least in telephone calls, that they misrepresented, said that they had deals that they didn't have, and that was the basis for the fraud charges. So that's what the crime was.
Is there any way we can help now?
No, I wish there were. I wish I could say, unless you're very close to Donald Trump, that's the only thing we really need right now. And of course, if Joe Biden gets elected, this would not be high on anybody's priorities. Most pardons are done at the end of terms, not at the beginning. And I don't see it happening. But right now, they're trying to find somebody that has a connection with Trump that might help. But that's where it would be. And it has to be a friend. I mean, I've watched the Trump pardons, and it's always Joe Pio or somebody that doesn't deserve it, but looks good for them. But it takes somebody to have Trump's ear to get it done now. Otherwise, the system you're supposed to do, that he hasn't done at all, is there is a pardon attorney. Most of the claims go to the pardon attorney. He reviews it, talks to the judge and the prosecutor, and then recommends it to the president. But as I said before, that's in the 17,000 group. And there's no chance of that happening.
Very sad situation.
Yes, it is. It is. And there are so many of those. More, I might say, on a totally different subject, so many people are convinced to enter plea agreements where they may be innocent because they're told if they go to trial, they can get 25 years, but if they take a deal, they'll get 2. And we'll never know how many people are in prison as a result, innocent people that have just been coerced in, and it's usually poor Black, 18-year-old kids who are told, yeah, you say you're innocent, but if you go to trial, you're going to spend a lot of time in prison. But if you take this deal, you'll be out in 2 years, you'll be 20, and do it. And I
That
think
was the theme of your last play at North Coast.
yeah, I
The
think
man who got sort of stuck in the middle of a murder trial, and
right.
we never knew how it ended, of course.
Yeah. Well, thank you for remembering that, Faye. But that's the way I feel. That's the real problem, that we'll never know the numbers.
By the way, this is the only play of yours, I think, that is on YouTube. So you could see it again or refer it to your friends, or anybody that has complete faith in the justice system could take a look at it and maybe change their minds. Sad statement, I think, about
Yes.
what goes on.
Well, the reason, Faye, is I have found out that because of the actors union, plays out for obvious reasons cannot be recorded because people won't go.
Huh.
But when we explained what the purpose of this was, first of all, the actors all agreed to do it free, by the way, were anxious to do it, and the union gave them permission to do it. So that's why that's only play, at least of mine, that's on. Of course, with Zoom now, I think more of them are being produced because they have no choice, but that had been the rule.
Shall we ask you what's in the hopper for the next production?
Yes, I have a play that was scheduled to be done, and by coincidence, David Ellenstein of North Coast always says that I can predict what's the next issue, but now it's too late because it's come to fruition. But this is a play about a woman who was raped by somebody 20 years ago, and now he's running for office, and she must make the decision as to whether she should come forward or not. And the other thing is she has signed one of these non-disclosure agreements. And I have this issue in my mind whether if a woman is raped and is paid to keep quiet, whether those agreements should be honored and whether they're enforceable or not. I don't think they are. I don't know why. More of these women just don't say, I'm not worried. You've paid me to keep a crime secret, and that can't be enforceable. So now you won't go, but
No, we always enjoy the discussion afterwards.
yeah, I think it's a terrific issue about whether these agreements are valid or not.
That came up in the Bloomberg when he was running, wasn't it? Didn't
Yeah.
it? Yeah, he had all these NGAs, yeah.
Yeah, they're all over the place. And I just don't think you can pay off a witness or a victim and enforce it. It's just bribery to me. That's all. It's just paying somebody to shut up, keep quiet for committing a crime. And I don't think they're enforceable, but they worry because they've gotten money and they're afraid they'll have to give it back. So I think that's
especially now with rape cases and people waiting years because they haven't really internalized exactly, what happened when, and it finally all surfaces I would imagine that a contract like that should not be something that is binding because there's so much emotionality involved.
Oh, I totally agree. Yes. I think they're against public policy. I think they're illegal. And I wish more people would challenge them because I think they'd be successful.
Anybody else have anything to say? Just unmute yourself and say it, or questions?
I guess that old saying, those who defend themselves, whatever that saying.
Have a fool for a lawyer.
Yeah, I mean, you really have to believe in specialization as you do, with doctors and professionality. And I think it truly is a very foolish thing because the law is very complicated and
Particularly in criminal matters, you want to.
yes.
And of course, that's one of the failings also of the system is rich people get really good lawyers and get off, and poor people either don't have any lawyers or get someone who's not qualified and they get convicted. And
The only case like that I was involved in was happened to be Jack Kevorkian, who represented himself at trial. And he said to the jury, "Do I look like a criminal?" And they said, "Yep." And then the judge gave him the maximum sentence. They could have given him probation. She gave him 10 to 25.
Oh,
So,
he represented himself. I didn't remember that.
yes, he did represent himself. And he had a young lawyer there to advise him who gave him the wrong advice, and it did not work out. But he thought, he's innocent. How could they convict him? Same as these guys.
Yeah, that's what happens.
Yeah.
How long a sentence did he get?
He got 10 to 25, but after 8 years, they let him out because he was very sick. And then he died, I think, 2 years afterwards of natural causes that he had. Long story, but he was, yeah.
Well, he was the first, wasn't he, Faye? I mean, wasn't he the
Well,
first?
he's the only doctor I really know. I could go into this. This is another documentary, I think. But he was the first doctor who said, "I'm helping people die because that's what doctors do." And when he first did it with Janet Atkins, who had Alzheimer's disease, there was no law against it in Michigan. So they couldn't prosecute him. Then they changed the law so that he was guilty of assisting a suicide. And at the end, it was more than assisted suicide. It was voluntary euthanasia. And that's what he was tried for because he said on Mike Wallace's program to 60 million viewers, I want to be tried for first-degree murder. He said that, which was not necessary. He could have gotten away with it easily, is what the appellate court said. No, that's a whole long story. Anybody want to hear that? We can do a whole hour on Jack Kevorkian.
All right, Faye, so are we done? Should,
Yes, I want to thank you, Lee. How lucky we are at the V to have you here, and what a beacon of justice and civility you are. We're very fortunate that you're
well,
here.
thank you for that, Faye. This is a
Thank you.
pleasure, and I hope everybody enjoyed it. Who I'm not the biggest crowd we've ever had, but it was